Hi everyone, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about managing a custom content center, and Inventor's Content Center has thousands of parts ready to use. It makes sharing and reusing parts really easy. One file can be used across multiple assemblies and by multiple designers, and you don't have that file duplicated across all those folders and all those workstations. Content Center also gives you the power of table-driven iParts, but with no factory file headaches that come along with iParts. I think Content Center is a fantastic tool and I love using it, but the real power comes in being able to customize it. Let's face it, the out-of-the-box content isn't perfect. Descriptions aren't descriptive enough. Materials can be awkward and too generic. So you probably find yourself spending time overriding those values to get something useful out of it. Now, that said, don't let this be a drawback, or don't let this drawback keep you from using Content Center. It's still a huge time saver. Content Center definitely saves tons of time not having to model all these parts. Customizing saves even more time to the point where you simply drop a part into your assembly and then move on. Nothing else is required to specify the right part. Customizing Content Center starts by tweaking the existing content that comes with Inventor and eventually leads to adding completely new content. Before long, you can have a substantial library of custom content, and it's going to require more and more time and effort to manage. So it's very important to start off right. So today we are going to cover some important things to consider when making a plan to roll out your custom content, what it takes to successfully copy existing content, and I'll go through an example of that with some recommendations and things to watch out for. And then we'll cover a few key points in customizing that existing content. Now, Content Center is a broad topic that requires a lot of training, so we can't cover everything in this AVA today. But so for example, we're not going to go over how to set up a new library or how to create new content. We've covered these topics in previous AVAs, and you can see the titles of those videos here. And we will post the links that you see here to the description of this video when it gets uploaded to YouTube.
Yep, and it's in the chat too, Karen. I just put it there.
Perfect. Thanks, Nigel. All right, let's talk about a few things that are important to consider when planning your custom content center. First, you need to identify your team of content editors. I recommend that editing permissions be restricted to about 2 to 5 people, and that's going to depend on the size of your organization. You can run it solo, but it's best to have a teammate with whom you can brainstorm and share the management workload. These content editors should be comfortable with Inventor. They should understand how Content Center works, clearly. And ideally, they should be involved in developing the Content Center management plan and procedures, or at the very least, committed to following those. Second, your team should define a naming convention for the Content Center families. As your Content Center library grows, you could potentially have hundreds of custom families, and a naming convention will be critical to keeping them consistent and organized. If your company already uses a part numbering system, then I recommend that you develop your family naming to be consistent with that system. It just makes sense to do so, and it can be a great guide. Third, you're going to need to choose a family folder structure. Now, I'm not talking about, let me switch over to Inventor here real quick and go into Content Center Editor. I'm not talking about these folders that are over here on your left that have all the part families inside of them. These are technically called categories, and that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about with a family folder structure is when you place one of these Content Center parts into an assembly, what Inventor does is it generates an IPT file and stores that locally on your hard drive in the family folder. And that's the family folder structure that I'm talking about. And it's important to have a plan to have a consistent family folder structure and naming convention for those folders so that you can keep your files organized. And let me switch back here to get our PowerPoint going again. So you have two choices for your family folder structure. You can do one-to-one, where each family gets its own folder, or you can do, your second choice is to have similar families sharing a common folder. For example, you'd have many different types of bolt would be stored in a folder named bolt, and all pipe flanges get stored in a folder named flange. I've had success using the shared folder method, so that's what I would recommend. That's ultimately going to be a choice that your team is going to have to make. Your team is going to need to decide how the different categories are divided. And again, if you have a part numbering system in place already, then that can be a helpful guide here as well. It's not easy to come up with a good plan, but it's important for a long-term healthy content center. And it's certainly worth the time to hash it all out up front. Finally, whatever you decide, document it. Write down your procedures for your team of content center editors so they know what they're doing and they can be consistent about it every time. And the documentation can be helpful for training new editors as they come along. One last thing before we move on. It's important to know what kinds of parts belong in Content Center and which don't. Like I said, Content Center is a fantastic tool, but that doesn't mean that you should just load everything into it. There are some things that just don't make sense to be in Content Center. For example, Content Center can only contain part files, no assemblies. And parts defined by your company should not be in Content Center. Those are going to be parts that your company creates the drawings for to define exactly how that part is fabricated, manufactured, produced. And the primary reason that these don't belong in Content Center is that there's no revision control on parts inside of Content Center. And again, because Content Center can only contain part files, you can't keep the drawings of your part files inside Content Center as well. So which parts belong in Content Center? If a part makes sense as an iPart, then it's perfect for Content Center. If there are any parts that you want to use in frame generator, bolted connection generator, and the tube and pipe module, then they must be in Content Center. Now, when you're ready to begin customizing your Content Center, I would say don't jump right into making new content. I would say start out with copying some of the standard out-of-the-box content and modifying it. And I'm going to go through an example of this in Inventor, and I'm going to give some recommendations along the way of things to watch out for and just some good management practices. So it usually starts out your desire, your need to customize content is because you are finding yourself using a part all of the time. Like for example, I'm using this flange, this blind flange all the time, but I don't like the description that comes in, and the material is not what I need, and so I need to customize that. So what I'm going to do, instead of making a brand new flange file and uploading that to the Content Center, I don't need to do that because the rest of the flange, the part file itself is just fine. It's perfect for what I need. I just need to modify that description and that material. And so I'm going to take this existing content and create a copy of it and then just change what I need to change. So I'm going to do that by right-clicking on this blind flange family, and I'm going to do a copy. As you can see, there's a couple different types of copy options, and there's a couple more that we'll talk about in just a second. I'm not going to go over the differences between those different type of copy operations because they're covered in one of those videos that we've got a link for. But I've been managing a custom content center for years, and my experience has led me to every time just choosing save copy as. And I basically don't have a need for these other kinds anymore at all. Save copy as does exactly what I need, so that's what I recommend that you use. Here are the other two type of copy options: independent link, or independent family, and link to parent family. And again, my experience leads me to now all I ever use is independent family, and that's what I recommend that you use. So you have, before you started copying, you've made a plan for how you're going to manage your content center, and you've documented it, right? So this is where we put that into practice. We have to name this family so that we can distinguish it from other families in the content center, and we're going to follow our naming convention that we've set up. So I'm going to name this flange, comma, blind, class 150, raised face, and then the material that I want, A105. Okay, and I recommend when you are deciding to create a new content center family to put a little thought in ahead of time of how you're going to name this specific family, and try to think ahead of families that you might be adding in the future. For example, I will be adding some flat-faced flanges in the future, and if I don't specify this family as raised face, then right now, then in the future when I add flat-faced, it's going to be difficult to tell the difference between the two. I'd have to come back in here and actually add RF to this family name to keep them separate. So just a little advice to kind of think ahead as much as you can. All right. One more recommendation is if you are working inside of a live content center, meaning that there are other users who could come in here and place parts out of the content center while you're modifying and working on things, then there's the possibility that between the time that you create this family and the time that you're finished modifying it and it's correct, somebody could actually try to place a part from this family, and since you haven't finished it yet, it's not going to be correct. The part they place is going to be wrong. And so what I recommend to avoid that situation, there's really not much you can do besides let the user know that this family is not finished, it's not ready to be used. And the way I recommend do that is to put revising do not use in the family name, because that's what they're going to see when they open up the content center to find a part. They'll see revising do not use in the family name. That will hopefully be enough of a clue to them to say, hey, back off, don't use this family, it's not ready yet. And then once you're finished making your changes to the family and it's ready to go, you can come back in here and take that out, and it'll just be the final family name. Okay. Now the family description, this is used when I place up one of these parts into my assembly and go into the bill of materials. This is what ends up in the description property for that part. And this is one of the things that I don't like. It's not descriptive enough for a given part in this family. So what I'm going to be doing is adding a description column to the family table where I can set up a more useful and descriptive description. And then this field won't serve that purpose anymore, but it still does serve the purpose of helping users find parts and families in the content center when they use the search function. It will search through this and find entries into this field. So what I recommend is usually the family name is going to contain enough keywords to be able to help people find what they need. But what I'll usually do is if I've got abbreviations in my family name, I'll go ahead and just spell those out in the description. That way it's an extra opportunity for the search tool to find things. And if people are not sure exactly what something means in a family name, they can take a look at the description and see, well, RF means raised face. And that's about it. That's about all the fuss that I put into the family description. All right, so the family folder name, again, you have come up with a plan for how you're going to structure your family folders and how you're going to name them, so you would follow that here. If you are using the one-to-one scheme where every family gets its own folder, then the folder name should just match the family name. And you can see that's the default behavior when you copy a new family in Inventor. It's just making those match down to the revising do not use. I would recommend taking that out at this point of the family folder name because the user's not going to see that. It's not helpful in letting them know not to use this part. And it's just something you might forget to change later. So you might as well take it out up front. So that's what you'd use if you were following the one-to-one scheme. If you are following a shared folder scheme, then you would have to decide what to put in here, following your folder naming convention. I'm going to do that for this example and just call the family folder name flange. So all my flanges will go in the flange folder. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It's going to copy the family. If you're using the shared folder scheme, one thing you will notice is that, well, when you hit OK, it's not going to do it for me because this is the first one I've done that's going to the flange folder. But if I were to create another family that's also going to the flange folder, when I hit OK, Inventor's going to know, hey, that folder is being used by another family, and it's just going to pop up a warning letting you know. And it's okay to just click through that. Yeah, I know that's being used by another family. That's my intention. Just click through and hit OK. It's just a warning. All right. Next thing, we're going to go ahead, now that we've copied our standard content to a new family, we're going to customize it. So I'm going to go and edit the family table. And there's a lot going on in this family table, too much for us to cover in this AVA. So what I'm going to focus on is a few of the most important things to pay attention to when you're creating a custom family and some things to watch out for. So I'm going to start with the file name column. This is probably the most important column to get right in your family because there are quite a few things that can go wrong with it. So first of all, you want each row represents a specific part that can be created from this table. And this will be the file name that gets created for each of those parts. Each of these has to be unique across the entire Content Center. Now that seems like a daunting thing to try and make sure something is unique across thousands of parts, but there are two pretty simple ways of making sure that happens. First, if your company is using a part numbering system, part numbering systems are, one of their purposes is to make sure each part has a unique number that identifies it. And so I would say if you are using one, then just use that unique part number as the file name, and then you're good to go. You can rest assured that no parts across the Content Center are using that same name. And if they are, then there's obviously a problem that needs to be fixed. So that would be the first recommendation. But if you're not using a part numbering system, then the next best option is to set up your file name to be the family name, because it will start with the family name, because that will basically narrow it down. Inventor forces you to use unique names for each family in the Content Center. If you try to make another family with the same name, it won't let you do that. So already, just in using the family name, we've narrowed it down to there are the only other parts in the Content Center that could possibly have that name would be in this family. So we start with the family name, and then we follow that by a dash, and then the key column 1, and then dash key column 2, because the key columns are basically what are used to define a unique part within this table, right? So, for example, in this part, the ND column, that's the key column. You can tell by it's red. That is basically the nominal diameter or the size of the flange. And that's all that's necessary to distinguish one part from another in this table. All these rows have different size. If there were additional keys, then those would also be required to narrow it down. Like for a bolt, for instance, you would have size and thread class and length. Those 3 keys would be required to narrow down a specific part. So let's go ahead and set this up so you can see what I mean in case that wasn't clear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a formula here to build the family or the file name. And I'm going to start again with the family name. .105, and then follow that by a dash, and then key 1, which will be ND. And I can click this ellipsis button. It'll pull up a list of all the columns available in this table. And I'll choose ND, and it'll insert a little variable that represents that. And when I hit OK, then it's going to build the file name for each of those files based on whatever the ND for that row is. Okay, so that ensures that these are all unique files. Now, there's a problem with this. And this is one of the things you're going to have to watch out for. This is a file name, and that's a slash. Windows is not like slashes in file names. I could probably hit OK, and I don't think Inventor would complain about that. But as soon as I try to place one of those files that has a slash in the name, there's going to be an error, and it might not even be clear why that error is happening unless you know what's going on. So we need to adjust this so that there's no slash in that file name. And unfortunately, there's not really a built-in way in the Content Center editor to take care of that particular problem. So what I do is I'm going to create a new column that basically duplicates the information in ND, but converts these fractional sizes into decimal sizes. So I'm going to add a new column, and I'm just going to call it decimal ND, since ND is the column I'm duplicating here. Data type is going to be string, and I'm not going to do an expression. There's my new column. I'm just going to copy this data, Control C, Control V, because most of this I don't need to change, but I do need to change these. And unfortunately, I do have to do this manually. Because there are only a handful of rows in this table, that's not too big of a deal. But if this table was hundreds of rows long, then going through each row and manually changing this data would be very time-consuming and annoying and prone to typo. So in situations like that, what I've done is I've actually created an Excel formula that will do the conversion from fractional to decimal for me. So I could edit this table in Excel, paste that formula in decimal ND column, and then copy it down, have it look at ND, and then copy it down. But I'm not going to go over that in AVA today. We don't have time to cover that, and I'm not too sure how useful it would be to just have me talk about an Excel formula. So what I will do is I will follow up with a blog post that will contain some instructions on how to do that, along with the formula that you can use. So be on the lookout for that in the near future. All right, so I've got my decimal ND column. My file name just needs to be, need to modify this formula to use the decimal ND column instead. There we go. All right, now the problem is fixed. File name is good. Each row is unique, and Windows is not going to complain about any invalid characters. All right, the next thing to move on to is our part number column. Now, if you are using a part numbering system, then of course it would make sense to have your part number be the number that comes from that system database. But if you're not, then you might not care what's in here, or you might. I don't particularly care what's in here right now. I haven't got a part numbering system set up. I'm just going to take this copy of out because that bothers me. Otherwise, I'm fine with that being in there. Now, you might be tempted to just clear this out, but there can be some problems with the tube and pipe module. If that column is empty, then it can cause problems with when you go to create a new style in tube and pipe, that family won't show up if the part number field is empty. So I've just gotten in the habit of having something in here, even if I don't particularly care what it is. If I could even put the word none in there, as long as it's just not empty. So that's another thing to watch out for. Okay, the next item of business is I want to modify the description. So there's no description column in here that I can use. There is this isogen description, but that's something completely different and not what I need. So I need to add a new column. I'm just going to call it description. And might as well have caption be the same as the column name, data type string. And I'm going to use an expression to fill this out for me. So my description is going to be flange, blind, and then I'm going to put the size here. And since I've got decimal ND, I'm going to go ahead and use that because that's what I prefer. I prefer the decimals to the fractions anyway, so I might as well use it. And then class 150 raised face. Now I'm not going to add the material to my description because in my bill of materials on my drawing, there's going to be a separate column that'll list out the material for each part. So I don't want to duplicate that information in the description column. So that's all I need there. Hit OK. Let's take a look at it. Looks like I need a space in there. So let's edit this. I think it doesn't like having that space there. I think I need to put that in quotes. And might as well do this side as well for consistency. There we go. Okay, so my description looks good. Now, this is a much more useful description than what I was getting before. Actually, I can actually tell the difference between different sizes of parts. All right, my description's good. Last item of business is changing the material. Steel is too generic for what I need, so I want to change this to something more specific to A105. Now you'll see it's pulling up a list here of what's available in my styles library currently. So if I need to set it to a material like A105, I need to make sure that that material is available in my styles library before I come in here to customize my content center. Otherwise, I won't have that option as a choice. Now I'm just going to copy, Control-C on that, select all the rest of the cells and Control-V to fill that in. And there it is. I've customized my content. Now I've got my description the way I want. It's going to show the material that I need. And my file names are unique. Hit OK. And that's it. Last thing to do is to remember to take out, now that this family is ready to be used, just right click on family properties, take out revising, do not use, and it's ready to go. And there's my shiny new custom content that I've copied from an existing family. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Cam. that helps a lot. I'm sure. I went through going through and creating some of these back when I started using Inventor a couple of years ago, and the slash thing, it's a big deal in Windows. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yep,
I
it's a
know
killer.
that firsthand. Finding it was like forever. So that is definitely super, super key to show. Let's go ahead and jump around. Did you need to jump into anything else, Cameron, or are we good to start jumping into questions and stuff?
Yeah, let's take some questions.
Awesome. Cool. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of the webcast, if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them into the Zoom questions panel whenever you want. I also want to make a reminder for this as well. For those of you who are Streamline customers, Cameron is doing the productivity training session for Content Center. Today, obviously, we went over about half an hour of Content Center stuff. But if you want to know more, Cameron's going to be doing a class next month for those people who have Streamline memberships with KETIV, full-blown 4-hour class on Content Center. And I even think at 4 hours, Cameron can't fit all of the stuff that he wants to. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Cameron.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
Yeah, so Content Center is huge. So if you do want to start, utilizing it more from the usage standpoint, definitely take a look at the other 2 videos that we've done on Content Center in the past. I did type those into the chat quite some time ago near the beginning of this webcast. And then if you are a Streamline customer, definitely check out that training class you're entitled to next month for Content Center specifically. And it's going to be taught by Cameron. So that's awesome. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you again, Cameron, for going over all of this awesome Content Center stuff with us. I know that Content Center is ginormous, and there's a ton of content we can go over within Content Center. So definitely, hopefully, this session became useful for those people who need to edit custom Content Center parts, maybe start authoring some of your own Content Center parts. A lot of good practices were shown in this video. So thanks again, Cameron, for that. And I think we'll see everybody next week on Thursday, same time, same place, Autodesk Virtual Academy with KETIV Technologies. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend and happy Pi Day.